kid can be a kid. Those are the 7 words that bring back my worst memories every time I hear them spoken. I used to think Chuck E. Cheese's was every kid's dream. My mind is forever tainted by the horrendous carnage I hardly endured when I visited Chuck E. Cheese's for the last time when I was 8 years old. Nathan Lawler, one of my friends from 2nd grade, was having a birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese's. Every kid in class was invited with their families. Not everyone showed up, but I certainly did. I wasn't even too fond of Nathan, but Chuck E. Cheese's was the GOAT. I couldn't have ever imagined the events that occurred that day. My family and I arrived at Chuck E. Cheese's and went in to get our arms stamped. I loved hearing the crunching sound from the Mr. Munch ticket machine near the entrance, as well as all the nostalgic arcade noises. It was one of those places where I never wanted to go home. I loved everything about it. I walked towards the party tables with my parents and my older sister Sylvia, who was 14 at the time. I saw Nathan with the other kids at the center party table. "There they are," I said to my family with excitement. My sister was carrying the wrapped present that I had picked out for Nathan. It was a large action figure of the Incredible Hulk. I always heard Nathan talking about wanting one. We were welcomed by Nathan and his parents. Sylvia set the present next to the other ones on the table. Nathan approached me. "Hey Ben, thanks for coming to my party," he said to me cheerfully. "Yeah, no problem. Where's the pizza?" I asked him. "Up your butthole," Nathan answered. "Dang it! Walked right into that one," I replied. "Yeah, and into my butt." "Nathan!" his dad called out. "Sorry," Nathan called back. He was a strange kid, but he had his moments. I do miss Nathan. Anyways, from there I ate some pizza and talked with my other classmates at the party, while we watched the cringy robots on the stage sing even cringier songs. The animatronics at Chuck E. Cheese's always struck me as a freak of nature's misguided conception of what child entertainment is supposed to look like. I know I'm not the only one. I mean, come on. Those furry behemoths were a mistake. But something was not right. The Chucky robot, the female chicken one, and Mr. Munch were all in sync with the song playing. But the other two on the right side were slower. Jasper Jowls, the dog one, and Pasquelli, the chef. They weren't as animated as the other 3. I didn't give it too much thought though. After I was done eating, I went over to play some arcade games. Me and one classmate, Jaden, went over to that one Terminator game with the guns. We continually died, but had fun, especially since we were playing it in our Arnold impressions and shouting things like, "Get to the chopper" and whatnot. Jaden and I hopped off after enough people hovered around us waiting for their turn. I could see that Nathan was crawling up the slide to the playground tunnels. We liked to do this thing at playgrounds where we'd crawl up the slide and wait for any kid to slide down from the top so we could scare the daylights out of them. We already heard Nathan screaming like a maniac and saw a little girl come out from the slide and run away in tears. "We probably shouldn't do that. We'll get kicked out," I said to Jaden. "Yeah, it is kind of fucked up." "I'll get the yellow slide," said Jaden. "I'll get the blue one," I said. We climbed up the other 2 slides and scared a good number of kids going down. I then heard an older sounding boy shout from the bottom of the slide, "All right, jackass, I'm coming up there." I quickly crawled up the slide and into the tunnels. I passed some confused looking kids as I progressed through the tunnels towards the slide where Jaden was. I got to the yellow slide and shouted down at Jaden, "We're spotted, go loud." I heard Jaden shout back up at me, "Oh shit!" I dove down the slide and regrouped with Jaden at the bottom. We were about to evacuate, but then I realized, "Ah, crap, Nathan," I said. "Leave no man behind, let's go," Jaden said to me. "Roger," I replied. We ran towards the red slide and shouted Nathan's name. Within the next millisecond, Nathan had slid down to the bottom and shouted, "They're onto us! Haul ass!" We all three made a run for it towards the stage room, but were stopped by the mullet-wearing enforcer that we recognized. It was Lucas, one of the fourth graders from school. He approached us with a malicious posture he likely picked up from his alcoholic father. "You ass clowns must think you're real funny. Beating on little kids, eh? Well, I'm here to kick ass and eat pizza, and I'm all out of pizza." We all ran in different directions. Lucas was closer to me than the other two. I juked him out and ran up the slide. I was almost at the top, but felt Lucas's hand grab onto my leg. "I got you now, prick," he said. I looked down at him and tried to shake him off before I used my other leg to kick him in the face. He shouted in anger and slipped, going down the slide. I went down the manual exit and made a run for it towards the men's bathroom. I went into one of the stalls and shut it. I waited there for about 10 minutes. Eventually, my body begged me to rid it of the disgusting cardboard pizza we all obviously loved. I finished up and stepped out of the stall to go wash my hands. Lucas then stormed in just in time. His nose was bleeding. He was fuming as he locked onto me and unzipped his pants. "You've got nowhere to run, little girl." He laughed and pulled out his weapon. He lunged at me and pushed me to the ground. Immediately after, I heard the sound of the door to the men's room bash open. "Holy shit," Lucas yelled. I looked up to see an employee in the Chuck E. Cheese costume was in the bathroom with us. But it wasn't the modern Chucky with the purple shirt. It was the older design with the orange hat and vest. He glared at me through the mask, then at the frightened and exposed Lucas. He kicked me in the face," Lucas said to the man while pointing at me. The man in the Chucky costume slowly walked over to the bathroom entrance and locked it shut from the inside. I was frozen in shock. I thought that I was saved by an employee from a thirsty monster. But really, I was in the presence of a much more dangerous threat. The man slowly walked up to Lucas, who was pulling his pants back up. The man put both of his hands on Lucas's neck. Lucas gagged and struggled to scream. I remained silent in the corner. Lucas blacked out, and the man let go of his neck, causing Lucas to collapse onto the floor. The man then turned his head toward me. I felt his burning stare through the mask. The room was getting darker. Everything in my vision was fuzzy. The man took 2 steps toward me. By the 3rd step, I was asleep. I woke up in what didn't seem like the real world, and rather a dream. But I knew I was awake when that horrid stench nearly killed the nerves in my nose. It was unbearable. I wanted to vomit, but I was very numb and couldn't feel much. I had just enough power to turn my head to see where I was. As numb as I was, I could still feel the burning heartache when I saw Nathan's lifeless corpse lying next to me. A sight I simply cannot erase. His blank eyes looking into mine and pale face with empty emotion. My friend was dead. As hard as it was to look away, I had to know what was happening. I looked further down to see that Nathan's lower half from the waist down was missing. That's what the smell was. His spilled entrails were still warm and red. He was laying on a fabric sheet to contain the blood, like what hunters use when they're skinning a deer. I was on the sheet as well. I slowly looked over to my right to see another kid laying down the other way. I instantly knew it was Jaden from his red Skechers. I looked downward to see that Jaden's head was severed off. Fresh blood was still flooding the fabric from the 2 bodies. I groaned as ferociously as I could, being as numb as I was. I then heard the sound of footsteps walking toward me in the distance of the dark, garage-like room I was in. My eyes closed for a full 3 seconds and opened to the sight of the man in the Chucky suit, standing above me like the angel of death itself. He kneeled down over me and held up a polished butcher knife to my face. He held the knife sideways so I could see my reflection in the blade. With his other hand, the man pressed into my mouth and drove his fingers against the ends of my mouth, forcing me to smile. He then pulled his hand out of my mouth and grabbed my left arm. His deafening voice began speaking words behind the mask.
Welcome to my kitchen. We're all here together. I promise you won't feel a thing.
I became less numb and more awake when the man swung the knife down into my left arm below my shoulder. I grew more conscious with each slice until he got through the bone. I could hear the dripping of blood from the stump of my arm into the rough fabric. The man stood up and picked up my severed left arm, blood leaking from the bone end. He took the arm over to what looked to be a large dissection table. He then walked back over to me and lifted me up, then threw me over his shoulder. I was set down in a chair with high legs. I was still heavily drugged. I couldn't move anything. On the dissection table was the corpse of another kid who was cut open. The man in the Chucky suit walked over to the table and pulled out small parts from the open child, and applying them to what appeared to be an uncooked pizza with other parts and entrails on it. Some I could recognize. There was part of an eye, some ears, and many bits of cut-out tongues. The man then set my severed arm on the table and cut down from the middle of my hand. He then grabbed the flap and peeled all the skin off. I sat there drugged and losing blood while watching that animal apply my skin to a pizza made from mutilated children. The sick bastard then turned around and walked over to what looked like a large furnace. He lifted up the door and pulled out who I saw to be my sister, Sylvia. Hands tied and drenched in sweat from the heat of the furnace. She looked over, and as her eyes met mine, she screamed in terror. I gained more control of my body. I looked at the table to see that the large butcher knife was still on it. The rotten bastard threw Sylvia onto the floor. He ever so slowly moved closer to her. I could hear him softly moaning in the mask. The rage took over. Any brother reading this will understand. I rushed over, holding the butcher knife in my only arm, and swung it down into his back. He squealed in pain like an actual mouse before I pulled the knife out from his back and attempted to take another swing, but he grabbed my arm, then kicked me in the gut, causing me to fall back onto the steel floor. He turned back towards Sylvia. She kicked him in the groin. The man fell to the floor, groaning in pain. Sylvia quickly got up and lifted me to my feet from the floor, then sprinted away, leading me to where we saw an exit into another room. She shut the door behind us. She turned around and looked at me, then at my severed arm that was still bleeding. She quietly sobbed in grief, as did I. We were in what looked like a break room. There was a locker that was large enough for me to fit inside. "Hide in here," Sylvia said as she opened the locker. I got inside and squatted down to avoid being seen through the vented holes in the locker. Sylvia pulled a chair from the break room and crawled under, then pulled the chair back in. A few more seconds passed before the door we came in from slowly opened. I could hear that freak salivating behind the mask. He whispered in his shrill voice,
"You don't have to hide from me. I'm gonna make it all better. I'm gonna make it better than ever. You'll see. You'll all see. Just you fucking wait.
He approached the locker and looked through the holes. My heart was throbbing against my chest rapidly. I held my breath desperately not to make a sound. Suddenly, I heard the sound of one of the chairs move. Then immediately after, the door into the break room opened and slammed shut. The mouse did a 180 turn in a millisecond, then charged forward, throwing the door open. He forced out a freakish cackle. I hoped to God that Sylvia got away in time. I couldn't hear anything beyond the cackle. I thought to step out and take a look. I really didn't want to run into him, but knowing my sister was safe won the debate. I stepped out from the locker and slowly opened the door. The torture room was blank, aside from the bodies on the ground. I approached the other metallic door that hopefully would be closer to a way out, as slowly as possible. I grabbed the handle, pulled it down, and slowly pulled the door to open it. The ever so quiet sound of the latch clipping back into place was 10 times louder than I thought to remember. I pulled the door open just a crack. It led back into the restaurant area. I fully opened it and stepped out. The lights were off. I could barely see. Not a soul in sight. I made my way over to the main entrance to see that they were barricaded by tables and chairs. I looked around, hoping there could be another exit. I was conscious enough to feel my blood go cold when I saw the main stage power on. The music started playing, but was off-key and disoriented. I began to wonder if I was already dead and trapped in some kind of hell. My legs moved on their own when I walked towards the party area in front of the stage. The second I neared the table in front of the stage, a spotlight from above powered on, and I heard the door to the kitchen creaking open. My first intention was to sprint full speed toward the playground tunnels and crawl up the slide. Crawling up that slide with my single arm was challenging, but my will to escape was incorruptible. I made it to the top of the dark tunnels, lit up by the little plastic windows on the sides. I crawled up to one of the windows closest to the stage area and looked down at the main table laminated by the spotlight. My heart sank as I could see that the two people approaching the table were the two stage animatronics that stood out from the rest, Pascali the chef and Jasper the dog. Pascali was carrying a plate concealed by a silver cloche and set it in the center of the main table. Jasper was nearing the tunnels where I was and was rapidly nodding his head in his mask as if he was sniffling like an actual dog while looking in all directions. His head stopped. He looked up at the tunnel window I was looking through. In a heartbeat, I lay back down on my back, praying he didn't see me. I rolled over and began slowly crawling back to the nearest slide. I heard a loud pounding against the tunnel walls behind me before I looked back to see a sight that will forever haunt me. The man in the Jasper suit was viciously crawling toward me at the speed of light while barking like a madman. At that moment, I had to have been the fastest crawling one-armed kid in history. I launched myself down the first slide I saw, only to be stopped by the man in the Pascali suit. He screamed in an inhuman way before grabbing my leg and pulling me down the slide, then throwing me onto the floor at the bottom. I tried to get back up and run, but Jasper made his way down and pointed a snub-nosed revolver at me. Jasper kept me at gunpoint while Pascali violently lifted me off my feet, carried me over to the main diner table, and sat me down in the seat in front of the covered plate. Jasper held the gun to the back of my head. Pascali then walked around to the other side of the table, then looked toward the stage. I turned my head to the stage to see the man in the Chucky suit standing in the center of it. Chucky stepped down from the stage and slowly walked up to the table seat across from me and sat down. Pasquale lifted the top off of the plate, revealing it to be the cooked pizza made from the skin and flesh of myself, Jaden, and Nathan. He pulled out a large pizza cutter from his apron and started cutting the pizza into slices. The horrible sounds of human skin being sliced and the blood oozing just like tomato sauce. The rotten stench of blood. This was it. I was in hell. Pasquale handed a slice to Jasper, then set one in front of me. He grabbed a slice for himself and sat down next to Chucky. All three were chewing through the mouthfuls of their masks.
Go on, try it,
said Chucky, as blood was running down the mouthpiece of his mask. The stupid bastards didn't check their surroundings. Jasper's revolver was on the table right beside me, and I still had an arm. The more they were biting into the cooked children, the more they dropped their guard. I grabbed the gun, held it up to Jasper's neck, and pulled the trigger. Jasper fell dead on the floor. Chucky and Pasquale jumped up from their seats before Pasquale took a shot right in the mouth. Chucky jumped up onto the table, about to attack, but halted when I pointed the gun to his rotted mask. He raised his hands in the air and slowly walked off the table toward me.
Why can't you understand? I only wanted to make the pizza better. I'm not a bad mouse,
he said in his high-pitched, deafening voice while tilting his head. Look what you did. You ruined what this place is about, where a kid can be a kid, I replied to him in my breaking voice. As I did, he lowered his hands and straightened his head, while standing up straight, towering over me. He dropped the act. The man behind the slaughter spoke in his true voice.
Not every kid.
I fired the last 3 shots of the cylinder into his torso. He fell backwards onto the table and rolled on his back. He laid there on the table, blood soaking from the 3 holes in his orange vest. He gagged and whimpered, then raised his hands up to his head and pulled off the Chucky mask. He looked up into the spotlight above the table. I dropped the gun and grabbed the large pizza cutter from the plate. He turned his head to me as I walked up to him. It was an older man that looked like he hadn't slept in years. His piercing yellow eyes were bloodshot. I pressed the pizza cutter against his neck and slit his throat. Blood was leaking off the table. I dropped the cutter and collapsed onto the floor. I laid in that room with the 3 dead monsters around me. My severed arm had stopped bleeding for a good while. It was time to give up the ghost. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the sound of the main entrance doors breaking open.